Hey gang, welcome to volume 27 of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you dig this, and hey, if you've got any scary hiking stories, email them to me at unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I hope you all had nice holidays if you spent your time that way, I sure did, and thanks for all the nice messages you sent me. It was very well appreciated, whether it was comments in the videos or the emails that I received. It's nearly 0 degrees Fahrenheit here, and tomorrow we're supposed to have wind chills near minus 25, and quite frankly, it's not the coldest I've ever been in, but I'm sure no one cares about that, but maybe it is a story for another time. Going snowshoeing in northern Canada in the winter? Yeah, things get a little bit colder, and not including a wind chill. Anyway, no one wants to hear me rambling. Let's get down to brass tacks, ladies and gents. Here's a few stories I hope you'll enjoy. Aime's apartment. A few years ago, I left grad school in New Mexico and returned to Oklahoma. I stayed with my mom for a while, and then Mom said she was tired of the 3-bedroom house she rented for about 10 years. So I roused myself from my funk and found a furnished apartment in a somewhat seedy part of town. It was cheap and I had next to nothing, having moved back to Tulsa with all my possessions crammed into my car. I moved in. At the time, I was part of a Wiccan coven, and 2 of my fellow coveners lived downstairs, so that was part of the reason I chose that building, besides it being cheap and the landlord being pretty decent. I didn't really feel too unsafe there at first, despite the fact that the apartments across the street were home to a nest of drug dealers. But as they kept a low profile, I figured as long as I left them alone, well... Anyway, a month or so after I moved in, an old friend from college called, needing a place to stay. He'd just gotten a job in town. Well, in a couple of months, he and I were an item, and bear with me, this does have some bearing on the story. During this time, I became aware of a vague feeling of discomfort when I was alone in the apartment. I had a rather large ficus tree in the living room, and every so often when I would pass by it on the way to the bedroom, I saw movement, sometimes glimpses of a hand and a face out of the corner of my eye. Chris, who was my boyfriend, said that the place made him uncomfortable also, so it was just as well that we weren't spending a lot of time apart anyway, since being alone at night there was kind of unnerving. Chris at the time was very interested in the Black Dahlia murder case. She was a drifter named Elizabeth Short, whose mutilated and sawed-in-half body was found in a vacant lot in 1947 in Los Angeles. To this day, no one knows for sure who killed her. One night we were lying in bed with a few candles burning in the room, and talking about this and that, with the stereo on and the door to the bedroom open. Suddenly we were both quiet, and both of us felt someone or something enter the room and just stand there inside the doorway. I sat up in bed and was overcome by a feeling of awful grief, and I began to cry. As we looked, there was a shadowy form against the off-white wall of the bedroom. I could see something like a hand moving, and Chris suddenly grabbed my arm. Both of us noted with a shock of horror that some of the clothing lying on the floor was positioned in the shape of a body, with a line between the different colored clothes just where it would be as if a body had been sawed in half. Honestly, it closely resembled the pictures we'd seen of Elizabeth Short's body as it was found in 1947. We were, pardon my French, scared shitless, and immediately threw ourselves into bed with the covers over our heads, after first destroying the image by shoving the clothes into a random pile. Later, we discovered a penny dated 1962 in the entry to the bedroom. At the time, Chris was reading a book entitled Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer, written by a woman who claims that her father was the one who killed Short. According to the book, this guy died in a car accident in Claremore, Oklahoma, about 30 miles from Tulsa, in 1962. Chris had cleaned the apartment that day and picked up all the loose pennies lying around on the carpet. We tended to drop change here and there and miss them in the dark color of the rug. But he swore to me that there was no penny there before. We still have it. I don't know if the presence we felt there was the ghost of the Black Dahlia, but I will never forget that night. We began to wonder if there wasn't some other entity attached to the place, one that we might have believed was Elizabeth Short. So we went to the library and searched for information about the building. All we found was that the apartment had been built sometime in the 70s. Lots of things could have happened in that time. There were other times when we would be talking or sleeping and would awaken or stop talking to notice that we were definitely not alone. Not to toot my own horn, but I am sort of sensitive to those kinds of things, and Chris is too in a way, and there were several occasions when we knew that someone or something was in the room with us. Sometimes it felt harmless and vaguely interested in us. Sometimes it definitely sent chills up our spines. I've had some training in utilizing my own psychic abilities, for what it's worth, as part of my coven training and through my own studies. The most important thing I ever learned and put to use was how to trust my own gut feeling. After thinking about all this for a while, my gut feeling told me someone or something was there at night when we found that penny. It was probably in the apartment at various times, but I still don't know what to make of it. I do know that both Chris and I and several of our friends all saw things moving out of the corners of our eyes while in the apartment, and some of us have seen faint images of faces and hands on the edge of one's field of vision. There was also a mirror over the dresser in the bedroom, a mirror shaped like a door with a lintel, and it made many of my friends nervous, and me too. I always felt as though someone was staring at me through that mirror, and tried my best to cleanse, seal, or otherwise decontaminate it through various means, but the feeling never went away. A friend of ours stayed in the living room for a few months while searching for an apartment, and he told me years later that he saw things moving in the darkness. He is not an over-imaginative sort, and he's an atheist to boot and doesn't tend to look for that sort of thing, so I figure he did see something. Several attempts were made to cleanse or exorcise the apartment by myself, the high priestess of my coven, and a few other people, but the feeling still remained until we moved. Chris and I moved out of there in 1996 to an apartment in a better part of town that is at least as old as the other, but has never had the same creepy feelings, strange presences, or sights that the old one did. My coven friends have also since moved out, but even though they lived in the same building, they never felt uncomfortable or had any unwanted phenomenon happen in their place. One last thing. When we moved out, we cleaned the apartment without power since the electricity had been switched to the other apartment. Chris says that when he walked by the open bathroom door on his way to get more paper towels, he saw for a moment what appeared to be bloodstains on the shower. I still don't know for sure what that was all about, but I am fairly certain that the apartment was the scene of something unpleasant, perhaps a suicide or maybe even a murder. One thing's for sure, I never read that place again. Since moving out, we haven't had anything comparable happen in our new apartment, so I think the place is definitely haunted. By what? I have no idea. The Stranger in the Woods by the Gotham Bat 27. It was Christmas Eve day. My parents had an emergency and had to leave to go to the hospital as my grandfather was having some medical complications. I'm not sure exactly what he was dealing with, but it must have been serious because my parents drove my two other siblings and I to my aunt and uncle's house, which wasn't too far from where we lived at the time. As my siblings and I said our hellos to the family, my parents gave my aunt and uncle all of our presents so that Christmas morning we could open them, even without our parents there. Now, I'm not usually a depressed person, but when I had to celebrate Christmas while my parents were somewhere in another state, I definitely felt lonely and sad. My cousin and I are super close, so while my brother and sister spent the night on their phones, my cousin and I played 20 rounds of Injustice 2. Almost an hour went by and we decided to do something else, so we went upstairs and started to read comics. My cousin's family is rich, so every time we meet he would always have a truck full of comics, video games, etc. It's always annoying, and to be honest, I was always jealous. The first thing he did was show me his new monthly box of comics. He wouldn't shut up about how amazing each comic was, and I just wanted to scream. I told him I had to use the bathroom and then walked to the bathroom. I stood in front of the sink and pulled out my phone. Scrolling through Instagram and YouTube proved fruitless, as it seemed that all the people I was subscribed to weren't uploading. I decided to turn to true scary story videos for the rest of the night to keep me occupied and my mind off the whole situation. Christmas morning was quite possibly the worst day of my life. My cousin woke up at 5 in the morning, and he woke everyone up, and we all proceeded to the living room, where almost half the floor was covered in presents for my one cousin. My aunt and uncle brought out our presents. We finished opening them within 5 minutes. I got 4 things, not including candy, socks, and underwear. 2 comic books, an airsoft mask, and a book. Meanwhile, my cousin wasn't even halfway finished with opening his presents. Nintendo Switch, a new iPhone, a new $400 video camera, you name it, he freaking had it. Around noon, my parents called and explained that they wouldn't be coming home for another day. This day was just getting better and better. I decided to take a walk and headed outside. My cousin's house leads out to a small patch of woods, and it was snowing pretty heavily when I started to walk into them. All I could think about was wanting to go home and be with my parents. My cousin didn't follow me out to the woods, which was odd as it always seemed that he followed me around everywhere. Probably playing his new video games, I told myself. I rolled my eyes and walked into the woods. Walking through the woods with nothing but a windbreaker on usually would have cut my depressing walk short, but since I was filled with anger and frustration, I decided that I would rather freeze to death than see my cousin playing with all his new things. Petty as it sounds, I was not happy, and at the moment I didn't want to even think about him or my aunt and uncle or the stupid fact that I was a day's walk from my house. The woods were small and went about half a mile deep before coming out the other side to a random highway. About 100 feet or so into my walk, I came upon this little opening in the woods. 2 logs sat parallel to each other, with a small pit in the middle, separating the logs. It was a little fire pit that my cousin said the other teenagers around his neighborhood used to smoke, drink, and do other things away from their parents. I sat down on the rotting log for a minute to catch my breath before looking over to spot a long stick. I picked up the stick and walked over to a nearby tree, and gripping the stick, I swung it at it, and in my mind I was yelling, screaming, swearing about the whole situation. I hated it all. The stick broke on the first hit. I stood there at the tree for a second listening, and from the distance, I could hear the broken stick hit the dead leaves. I threw down the remaining part of the stick and turned around to sit back down. It wasn't even 5 minutes later when I heard a thump on the dead leaves. At first I ignored it. It was probably some animal. It wasn't until the 3rd or 4th thump that I started to take notice, one each getting closer and closer. When I heard the 5th thump, I stood up and began to scan the surrounding woods. Nothing. I called out, "Is there someone there?" Silence. I'm not normally a paranoid person, but lately I had been somewhat on edge. I stood there silently waiting until I heard another thump. This time the thump sounded closer than ever, almost as if it had come from right behind me. I took off running. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if another thump would follow, and I didn't even stop to think until I was back at my cousin's house. I burst through the door and was met with not only my aunt and my uncle, but my parents, who used the excuse of not coming home until the next day to surprise us. We got home and I thought nothing of what had happened in the woods until I got a text that sent me into panic mode. It was around 10. I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard my phone buzzing on the sink. It was my cousin asking, "When you went on your walk, did you happen to see anybody suspicious?" I texted back, "No." It took him a little longer to reply, but his next message said, "Whenever you guys left, my parents noticed some guy staring at our house on the edge of the woods." I could feel the panic rising. I texted back quickly, "What did he look like?" "Homeless," he said, and that was it. Any attempt I made to try to get more answers was pointless, as my cousin seemed to stop answering me. He still doesn't answer my questions even to this day. I would be lying if I said we ever heard anything about that random homeless guy. I don't know what intentions this guy had, and I don't think I ever will. It just makes me wonder, what was that guy doing in the woods? And what would have happened if I had ignored those thumps? Either way, I'm glad I was as paranoid as I was that day, because paranoia might have just saved my life. We Have No Idea What We Saw by C. Dietz. The story takes place over the course of a week or so, and I'm leaving my friend's name out for anonymity's sake. I was back for the summer from college and was enjoying a regular summer, just hanging out with friends and doing odd jobs for family members. Recutting trails on the property for my mom and stepdad, fixing fences with my dad, and running errands for my yaya. She can no longer walk or drive or get out that much due to a recent knee replacement surgery. It was near the end of the summer, and a few of my friends and I had been out late, as none of us really felt like going home anytime soon. So, after dropping 2 people off, the last 3 of us took a slightly longer route home. We were still on the freeway, but it was around 3 a.m. at this point, and we were just some of the few people on the road. It was a starless night, and my friend's car exterior lights were all that was lighting up the surrounding area, save for the occasional lamppost. I was riding shotgun, and my second friend was in the back seat. We were having a funny debate, as we always did when we hung out, and we were generally coming to a consensus when I thought I saw something ahead. At the very edge of the bubble of light in my friend's car, I saw a light tan shape on the side of the road. I'm from California, and deer aren't uncommon, especially by the side of the freeway. And given all this, I assumed it was a deer, albeit a notably lighter colored deer than I had ever seen. My friend in the back seat was looking at his phone, and my friend who was at the wheel was focusing on the road, so I figured they'd miss it if I didn't point it out. The driver and I used to work at a zoo and are nature geeks, so this was a common habit, pointing out animals when we saw them. Just as I point at the deer and say, "Hey, look, a deer!" I was proven wrong. The deer was close now, and I realized it had no hair on its body, and as it stood up slowly, it pivoted to face the road. This exposed a tall, entirely, and I mean entirely, hairless body of a completely naked man. No hair on his head or body, and at the speed we were driving, my eyes didn't pick up facial features. So all my mind had was the flesh-toned silhouette of a man who must have been at least 6.5 feet tall, with long, thin arms and legs, and it was slowly rising from the darkness. The friend who was driving and I immediately freaked the fuck out. We each start yelling and screaming shit like, "What the fuck was that? Was that a person?" And all that kind of shit. In the back seat, our other friend asks us what the fuck we're freaking out about, so we told him. Now, this freaked me out because we were only about 4 miles from where I was staying at the time, and that proximity to who we just saw was enough to make me uneasy. After a few minutes of driving and freaking out, we got to my family's house. I ran up the walkway and closed the door behind me, locking it. My dog, a Mastiff Pit Bull mix, greeted me, and I quickly made sure every window and door in the house was locked shut, and if possible, barred. Then I went to my room, making sure my dog came with me. My dog was not particularly ferocious, despite his intimidating appearance. Generally, he was a big teddy bear, but he did have a strong protective instinct. Once he had stopped me from walking right into the ambush of a mountain lion, but that's another story altogether. Point being, my dog was a good protector and would warn me of any trouble. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. The next morning I finally crashed, and then woke up after about an hour and went about my day, a little bit groggier than I would have liked. Generally, I wasn't letting the previous night bother me. About a week later, I was asleep when my dog woke me up, growling at the big window in my room. I assumed he was growling at my fish tank's filter or something, which he has done in the past when I first put the tank in. I waited maybe about 15 minutes until he stopped growling and then went back to sleep. The next morning I woke up and checked my room. Maybe a rat had gotten in the walls or there had been a bat or something outside. What I saw in my window made me feel like I'd been doused with ice water. There was a large handprint on my window, right in the center of it, overlooking the part of the freeway where I'd seen the man on the side of the road. The handprint was at least another hand and a half larger than mine, and up higher than I or any of my family could reach without a step stool or stepping a couple rungs up on a ladder. Had this thing found my house? Was my family in danger? Luckily, for the time being at least, the second question was answered. Nothing bad happened to my family since then. About a week and a half later, I went back to college and was no longer in town for this crazy motherfucker to stalk, so hopefully, whoever he was, he lost interest in my family's house. Still, this is one of the two scariest and most unnerving things to ever happen to me, and I hope it remains that way, and nothing like this ever happens to me again. I think what scares me the most from this experience is the lack of context for what I saw, and the lack of understanding afterwards. I'll never really know why that guy was by the side of the road, and I'll never know if it was his handprint on my window. And if it was, why did he choose me to follow and observe? It's that lack of information that scares me. My scary cult experience. This might not exactly be what most people would see as a cult, but it's what it was. The Family Foundation School was based off the East Coast Ridge, as the teachers and staff had been part of East Ridge. East Ridge was based off the concepts of All Addicts Anonymous, which was essentially the beliefs used by Synanon in the 70s or 80s, I think. Essentially, this was a recovery cult that made use of the 12 steps to brainwash people. I was 15 when I was sent to this school. Most kids who went there had an escort service. Essentially, their parents had paid people to kidnap them. I wish I was exaggerating, but escorts of this nature sneak into a kid's room in the middle of the night, wake them up, and if they don't cooperate, put them in chains and drag them off to the school. I went willingly with my parents. I wasn't a particularly bad kid, but I was suicidal and depressed, and it badly affected my grades and ability to do my schoolwork. I had been hospitalized 3 times, so my parents were desperate and willing to try anything to get me help. So like I said, I went willingly. I didn't think it was going to be bad or abusive, and I thought it was going to be just some place to get intensive therapy on a longer-term basis than my stays at the mental hospital. I realized pretty early on that there were a lot of techniques that were used that were not okay. I ran away after 2 weeks and was found in about 10 hours. I refused to submit to life there in the beginning. They verbally abused kids in front of each other, used exercise and deprived kids of food as a means of punishment and coercion, and the religious aspects were pretty horrifying. They used tactics such as exile and shunning to get people to submit. I recall in my life skills class there hearing about how brainwashing isn't bad, how it's good that they were reprogramming us to be model, productive citizens. Phone calls with family were always monitored, and if you tried to say something about how you were being treated, they would tell your family that you were being manipulative and not to believe you. I only had alone time with my family once in the 8 months I was there. I was allowed to go to dinner with them. I remember the entire time thinking that I should tell them, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. Even to this day, 13 years later, I still don't think they believe me. I mean, I know they do, but there is still something that nags at me about how no one should trust me, since it was drilled into me there that I'm a liar and manipulative, and that no one should trust me. I got out because I got kicked out. I had a mental breakdown. I had been cooperating and following the program, but then my aunt had been diagnosed with cancer at some point along the line, and it took her quickly. My parents wanted me to go to the funeral. School said no, so my parents said that I couldn't go. I went silent for a few days, and then I just started flipping out. I mean, every day. I had anger problems, but I lost my shit, and I flipped out on everyone. I don't remember it all too well, but I remember spending a lot of time in isolation, and I would literally just attack anyone who tried to touch me. I had no control, and it was horrifying. I'm honestly not an angry or violent person, and the idea that I acted like that still haunts me. I thought I was going to a mental institution for the rest of my life because that's what they said would happen if I left. My mother sent a letter saying that if I was kicked out, that I wouldn't go home, and they would send me someplace where I would be locked up 24/7. One day, I saw my stuff was packed, and I was terrified. I thought I was going to be sent to a mental institution, but my dad was there, and he took me home, and I cried. Well, that's what really happened there. And there were effects to it. I didn't realize how fucked up it actually was, and that it actually was a cult that focused on you will die without us mentality, until I was about 19. I'm in touch with a few survivors, and we're all at least still a little bit fucked up. Sometimes the only thing I can do is laugh about how fucked up that time was. The good news is that the school announced that they were closing this past August. Unwanted House Guest by Lisa. Let me start by saying that, though the activities in this home have been going on for over 50 years, I wouldn't exactly call it a haunting. Rather, I feel the home is the unfortunate focus for spiritual activity. The home in question is a simple wood frame house. It was initially a 6-room structure before 2 additional rooms were added about 20 years ago. Upon doing a little background check, I found that the home was originally located in the city cemetery, and that it had sat vacant for many years before my grandfather purchased it. It was then moved to stand beside the Baptist church, and my mother grew up in this home. She experienced many strange occurrences which she couldn't share with us, but one in particular she did share, which happened when she was around 8 years old. She was sleeping one night in what is now the middle bedroom when something woke her up. She didn't know what. She saw on the bedroom wall the shadow of a figure moving steadily across it. There was enough moonlight to fully illuminate the room as both windows had the blinds up. There wasn't anyone outside the home casting the shadow, nor was anyone in the room with her. She leaned up closer to get a better look when the shadow reached out and struck her. The blow was hard enough to turn her head with force, and she immediately shot under the covers and remained there till morning. As an adult with children of her own, she remained in this home. My sisters have told me about a number of accounts, though I will only mention one. Both of them have stated about twice a week something would come into the back door and bang repeatedly with such force as to shake the entire house. Our mother would always break out the shotgun until the beating stopped, though there was nothing physical at the door. The back door was located in the kitchen, and there was a large window giving a clear view of the entire backyard next to it. There was never anything or anyone to be seen while this beating on the door was going on. I recall when I was about 6 or 7 watching one of those old-fashioned solid steel irons roll across the kitchen floor. If you guys are familiar with the type of iron I'm speaking about, you know, the kind that had to be heated up on an open flame, you know that those things weighed about 10 pounds and could not, regardless of whether there was a breeze or not, roll on its own. And there was no breeze. I am prone to hearing things, though I have seen things on 2 occasions. My younger sister, I'll call her Babe, would always see things too. This took place when I was 19 and she was 15. Our mother had passed away and our father had remarried, so it was just she and I living in this house. On this occasion, our niece Tiff was staying over for a few days. I worked an 8 to 5 job, and if I was ever going to be late, I would call Babe and tell her when to expect me. She was always nervous about being in the home alone, and this particular time, since our niece was there with her, I just didn't bother calling. When I eventually got home at around 7 p.m., my brother, Babe, and Tiff were standing on the front porch, and Babe was noticeably upset. When I asked why, she asked me if I had been home earlier to change clothes and then left. I responded in the negative, at which point she burst into tears. My niece explained that around 5:30 they heard my car, then they heard the front door open. They opened the bathroom door, which has a clear view of the front door, and to be certain that it was me. They said that I walked in dressed in a red dress, red pumps, gave them an irritated glare, and marched on towards the back. Well, as I previously stated, I did not get home until close to 7, and though I owned the outfit in question, I was dressed in tan slacks and a matching tan blazer that day. When they went to find me later, I was not there. They stated that they searched the entire house before looking out and seeing that my vehicle was gone. Babe was spooked and so was I. We spent the next 2 weeks at our sister's house. I still live in this house, and over the past 3 years it has been basically quiet. As of late, however, I am noticing unexplained moving shadows and unaccounted for movement in my peripheral vision. My 15-month-old daughter appears to see something which she points to and tracks with her eyes and head. Upon occasion she has appeared to follow it and looking puzzled. I am the only one willing to live there and put up with the extra quirks particular to this house. I have lived many a night in fear, and don't want my child growing up that way. so I think I will finally be moving. Eight Guys Followed Us by Gentle Life. I don't know how to start this story, but it all happened the end of my freshman year of high school. My friend Sean from PE was talking to me about this guy that our mutual friend was going to fight. He asked me if I'd be down to watch the fight with him after school. I had band practice at 4 and had an hour to waste, so I told him, sure, I'm going to take my ex with me since she wanted to go to my band practice afterwards. He agreed and we split ways. After school comes around, I go to meet up with my ex and we start walking to where the fight was going to be. In this case, the fight was going to be behind a grocery store down the street from our high school. We get there, seeing a few of my friends, and ask them what was the whole point of the fight as well as guesses of the outcome. There had to be at least 12 of us waiting to watch the fight. When the two guys got there, they wasted no time at all and started swinging at each other. My friend got an even fight. I can't say either of them won because I don't even remember. I just remember a cop car pulling up and helicopters were overhead, and we all ran as fast as we could. I ended up losing my friends with my ex, and we say fuck it and begin to walk to my ex-guitarist's house. We got to a street that would have taken us directly to my guitarist's street, but at only 3 houses down when we saw the guy my friend was fighting with a few of his friends, about 7 of them, not including him. I just tried to ignore them as they were talking crap about my friend. I guess they noticed me and started talking about me. I know, it was a dumb idea, but I got annoyed and straight out told them, you shouldn't talk shit about people, especially if it's not to their face. All of them looked at me with a glare that was full of hate. My ex told me to ignore them and to just keep walking, so that's exactly what we did. We walked like a block down the street, and I just had a bad feeling, so I turned to look behind us. I turned to see all 8 of these guys following me and my ex to my guitarist's house. And she was in a panic, and I did my best to stay calm, but I just knew something bad was going to happen. The guy that fought my friend ran up to us, and I was ready to fight him, but he just says to me, my homies said they want to jump you unless you give me all your stuff. I looked at him like he was crazy and told him, you guys can't have shit of ours. He laughed and walked away. By now I was on my guitarist's street, and we tried our best to go as quick as we could before they could get to my guitarist's pad. We got there without any problem and began to knock on his door. He didn't answer, and I kept banging, but nothing. That's when I start to hear their voices. The panic begins to raise inside of me as I thought as quickly as possible. I led my girlfriend to my guitarist's garage that was behind a gated pool, since that's where we practiced, and I knew it would be unlocked. I gave her my backpack and phone, telling her no matter what she hears, don't come out of this garage or let anyone inside. She was crying and just nodding at me. I locked the doors from the inside and then went out to confront the guys. They were all waiting in the backyard on the other side of the gate. Yelling at me, calling me names, saying they're going to take my things and beat me down, and I just yelled back that they better leave. They were trespassing and harassing me and my girl. They laughed, and one of them said something that pissed me off. He said, yeah, I've got something waiting for your girlfriend right here, and grabbed himself. I told him that they better not lay a hand on her. That's when one of them says, hey, come and fight us then. I'm not a shitty nor great fighter, but 8 guys versus my short ass? I'd probably die. I just yelled back, I'll fight you all, one by one, and they busted up in laughter. That's when I heard a different voice say, why don't you fight him one-on-one? What are you guys, pussies? It was this metalhead senior and 2 of his friends that knew my friend Sean. They were all twice the size of the guys that followed me, and by the look on their faces, I could tell they felt a taste of fear. Hey, come over here. We'll make sure they don't jump you or jack your shit, said the main guy. I honestly had no option but to trust him. I jumped over the gate and got ready to fight. They had this skinny skater guy fight me who I later found out was on drugs, and I don't mean weed. I just stood there waiting for him to do something, and he swung and hit me in the face. I didn't even move to defend. I just punched him right back square in the nose, and then another 2 or 3 to his body. He punched me, making me lose my balance, so I grabbed him and I tried to push him down so I could get my balance back. And that's when he got a lock of my hair and pulled me down with him. Yeah, the struggle of long hair. He just kept hitting the back of my head over and over, as all I could do was hit him in the ribs to try to knock his hair out. And then I heard the metalhead say, "All right, that's enough." The guy got up and I sat myself up, breathing heavily. The guys that followed me started to leave the property when one of the metalhead's friends says, Oh shit, that guy has a gun." My heart began to pound, and I go to see who the friend was talking about. I stared blankly at my father, yelling at the guys that had messed with me, holding someone's skateboard in his hand with a small handgun in the other. I chuckled a bit and said, "Guys, that's my dad," as I went to walk up to my father. Turns out my ex-girlfriend got freaked out when hearing the fight. She called him from my phone. He told me he was proud of me for standing up to those guys, and that my uncle was now chasing those other guys around in his truck. It was the first time my father stood up for me, and it was extreme for him to bring a gun I didn't even know belonged to him. The most fucked up part of the story is that my bitch-ass guitarist was home for the entire time and was too scared to help me and my ex. Fucking guy lost all my respect that day, and I even replaced him in that band later on. He Was in My House. Submitted by Carolyn A. Just found your channel and hoping to share. 3 autumns ago, my husband and son went out to their tree stands to try to get their first deer of the shotgun season, and I was just puttering around the house trying to get an early start on getting the house ready for Thanksgiving. I was hosting that year, and I didn't want to be running around at the last minute. Scott and Teddy left early in the morning, so I did take my time having breakfast and making a list of things I needed at the store. We lived about 35 miles from the nearest Walmart and Target, out in the woods in our dream home that we were able to build after my husband got into a terrible work accident. Scott worked in a power plant, and the company was negligent with a piece of equipment that basically fell apart during an inspection, and something with a flywheel came undone and took my husband's foot off right above his ankle. He was given a huge settlement, and we were able to build our family home. Funnily enough, they brought him back as a consultant, and he makes more now than he did then. Such is life. So my men were out hunting, and I went into town to get some decorations and things for the house. I was in Target for about 45 minutes and got what I wanted and threw everything in the back seat of my Infiniti. Looking back, I wonder why I didn't take my husband's Land Rover, but I think it's because we hadn't seen any snow yet. I made the drive home, pulled into the garage, and got my things and went inside. I texted Scott to see how they were doing, and he said nothing was stirring. We own land with some friends between our houses, so the guys were lucky that they didn't have to drive and could just take our quads out to their stands right from the house. I told them to hang in there and I'd have chili ready when they got home. That's what I started to make after cleaning the great room and front foyer. I went down to the basement to our freezer to get meat for the chili and noticed my husband's workshop door was closed, which was odd. His gun safe was in there and he rarely kept that door shut, unless he was woodworking and he didn't want the noise to bother us. I shrugged it off and went back upstairs to cook. While I was working, I was listening to music and singing along, just enjoying the day, and it was getting around the time that they would be coming back. I went to check on the chili, then stood looking out the window at our yard thinking about the coming month. That's when I got the shock of my life. In the reflection of the window, behind me I saw something moving across the room. I stood there at first thinking it was just my eyes, so I turned around and found it wasn't. There was a man standing in my kitchen on the other side of our island. I screamed and backed into the counter. He didn't say anything. He just stood there holding a pillowcase, staring right at me. I made a move for the dining room, and we have an open floor plan, and thought I could get to our back door. He made a move too, and grabbed me and told me to lie down on the floor and I wouldn't get hurt. I screamed for him to not hurt me, and he told me to just be quiet and it would be all over quickly. I didn't know what that meant, so I screamed again, and he yelled to shut up, and he wasn't going to hurt me. "Get the fuck on the floor," he yelled. I did, shaking and crying. He put the pillowcase over my head and tied my hands and legs, and then told me not to move. I heard him go away upstairs, and then I heard him rummaging around up there. I was crying and praying for my husband and son to get home, and hoping they would get there soon. I heard my phone buzz and thought desperately that it was one of them trying to text me. It felt like hours, and the man came back down and asked where my keys were. I was blubbering at this point, and he leaned down right next to me and said, "Where are the fucking keys?" I think I just stammered, out on the counter, and he got up and went into the kitchen. Then I heard our garage door open, my car start up, and the outer garage door opening. He drove away, and I started screaming my head off for Scott or anyone to help me. Literally 5 minutes later, I heard the sound of our quads, and soon my guys entering the basement from the downstairs door. I screamed for help again, and I heard Teddy pounding up the stairs yelling out, "Mom? Mom?" He saw me and dropped down, yelling, "Dad! Dad, something's wrong. Call the police." For whatever reason, Scott kept asking what was wrong, but Teddy kept yelling for him to call help. He got me up off the floor, and I just fell into my son's arms, sobbing and shaking. Scott got upstairs and was on his cell with the police, who said they would be out as soon as they could, and asked if the guy was still in the house. Scott said he didn't know, asked me, and I said I think he stole our car. Teddy ran upstairs with his gun and checked everywhere, and Scott looked in the garage to see my car was gone. They both tried to get me to calm down, easier said than done. I finally got my story out. Teddy ran all around the house, checking the windows and doors, and everything was securely locked and nothing was broken. I finally stopped breathing like a maniac, and the police got there and they asked me what had happened. I retold my story again, going to the store and everything. Another officer came and they said they found my Infiniti in a parking lot back in town. The keys were still in the ignition, but the car was off. They asked if anything was stolen, and I said I didn't know, and they checked the house with Scott shambling around with them. I gave them the best description I could, but if you've never been through something like this, it's hard to get a good description. I knew he was about my height, 5'5", and he was heavy-set and had a mustache. That was all I remembered, and I'm sure it didn't help. The police said they wanted my car to go through it for a better search, and I said I didn't care how long they kept it. I was now being the mother to a very worked-up son who wanted to go hunt this guy down, and my husband who was trying to console both of us. They did search the car and found the guy's prints all over it, and more importantly, prints all over the inside of the trunk, plus a ratty winter hat that wasn't mine. The detectives came out to tell us what they had found and asked if I was sure I'd locked my car when I was at the store. I told them I thought I had, but I couldn't be sure. One detective nodded and said, "Well, this is just a guess at this point. It looks like some guy got into your car, dropped the back seat down, and then crawled into your trunk. When you got home, he sneaked around while you were doing what you were telling us you were doing, and then he made his move to rob you. I figure he waited till he realized you were the only one at home." I was floored, and my husband said he was selling my G37 that day and getting me a Land Rover or something without a trunk on it from now on. The guy was a bad thief on top of it all. He only got away with a bunch of my costume jewelry that I kept on my dresser. He didn't even go into our walk-in closet where I kept all my valuable stuff and my husband's watch collection. He did get my son's Xbox and a guitar, but outside of that, that was it. He hasn't been caught yet. I did sell my G37. We put in a new security system that triggers the garage door and the basement door no matter what time of day, and it just bleeps to let us know. And I am still so scared I don't go shopping alone at all. I know this is a weird story, and I've never heard anyone else share something like it, and I know I didn't get hurt, but I still talk to a doctor and freak out at the littlest sounds in the house when no one else is around. Thanks a lot, thief. You didn't get many valuables, but you stole my peace of mind and feeling of safety in my own home. I hope they catch you sometime soon, and you pay for what you took from me. Unwelcome Home by Jerome. My name is Jerome. I'm 32 years old. Please forgive me, but I'm not a writer. But I do have a story. So, some backstory first. My mother had me when she was 18, and I was my mom's first child. Though my mom never married my sperm donor, she did marry his worst enemy and had my 2 half-sisters with him. We'll call this guy Tim. Tim hated me for what my sperm donor did to him all through high school because Tim was a nerd and Matt, the sperm donor, was a Billy Badass. I was beat from the age of 5 to 11 almost every day for Matt's sins against Tim, and also because at 7 years old I became a Christian. Tim was an atheist, which made the beatings worse. I had just turned 10 years old when my mom and Tim moved my sisters and I to a new town. This happened every couple years. Tim had found a 2-story, 3-bedroom, 1-bath with a full basement home. The moment I first saw it, I felt uneasy, like I was not welcome and I was being watched. But I was a child, so I didn't know how to tell my mom. We moved in on my first night in the house. About midnight, I heard footsteps coming from the basement. Up the stairs, through the kitchen, into the hallway, and right up to my door. The knob started jiggling, and then completely turned, the door opened, and no one was there. I was terrified, but I yelled out, "In the name of Jesus Christ, you stay away from my door and stay out of my room." The door that was fully open now just slammed shut. After that, it never opened my door again, but it would stump up to my door every night. Plus, every day we lived there, Tim, who was always a heavy drinker, got worse and started spending a lot of time in the basement. 2 weeks before I was sent to live with my grandmother, I came home from school. I walked into the kitchen and heard through a big vent Tim having a one-sided conversation with someone in the basement. He was saying something like, "Yeah, that boy's a pain in the ass." No, I think his mother would notice if he went missing. Plus, how would I do it between the time he gets home and the time she does? Now, I know you would think maybe he was talking to somebody over a phone, but cell phones were not big back then, and we didn't have a house phone because he didn't pay the bill for 2 months, which was something my mom got her ass kicked for arguing with him about. I walked quietly out of the kitchen and into my room. As I got close to it, I heard my sister Jean's mechanical baby doll saying, "Mama," and "I'm hungry." I thought my sisters were playing with it until I opened their door, saw the doll sitting up by the bed looking at the door, and no one else was there. I thought it was malfunctioning, so I got a screwdriver and removed the back to take out the batteries, but there weren't any in it. Scared by what Tim said, and now with the doll having no batteries, I turned over the doll and its mouth moved, saying, "Put me down," in a deep and evil voice. I dropped it and ran into my room. Tim came up an hour later, and I asked who was in the basement with him. He looked at me funny and said, "I was alone, not that it's any of your business." 2 weeks later, he dragged me up to his room and started beating me, and my mom sent me away. A month later, she left herself with my sisters. Being a Christian, I had 4 wall crosses, and I thought of them as protection. 2 of them just fell off the wall after 3 months of living there, while I was just doing my homework, and broke into splinters from a 5-foot fall. One disappeared a week later when no one but myself was home. I had to go to the bathroom. When I went back to my room, it was gone. The last one stayed until a month before my departure, but would be found off the wall and hidden somewhere in the room. Then it disappeared as well sometime in the night with my door closed and deadbolt, which I had fixed 2 months before with WD-40. I never found it. Another thing that often happened when I was alone in the house after school was what I called the staircase game, and it wasn't fun. It would start with stomping coming up from the basement stairs and back down again, and then it would turn into a running sound, up, down, faster and faster. And then the stairs to the second floor would start too slow at first and then speed up. It made tons of noise, and yes, I looked once when it happened at the bottom of the second floor stairs. Couldn't see anything that would be making the noise, but I was thrown backwards into a wall, so I guess I learned my lesson there. I just sat in my room or in the front room and played until someone got home. Sometimes I'd hear my name called by Tim, Mom, or one of my sisters, only to find that they didn't call me or were not in the house at all. One night I woke at 3 a.m. to my little sister Chrissy crying and screaming that there were 3 men standing outside her window looking in. Her window was 8 feet from the ground. Tim was in one of his few sober nights and ran out to catch the guys, but no one was there, and there was nothing outside that all 3 men could have been standing on to look in. Tim screamed at her for lying and told her to go back to bed. But in the morning, my other sister Jean said she had seen them too. Something else was the fact that about a month into living there, Tim, who hated dark places, as I said, started spending hours down in the basement, which, even with several lights, was always dark and freezing, cold from summer to winter and back. And he was always with the lights off. One day, Tim's 1986 Nova broke down. He was trying to fix it, but needed some wire cutters. He told me to go to his tool cabinet in the basement to get them for him. And I went down into the basement after flipping the switch for all the lights, and I had complained to Tim that I was scared. He told me, "Stop being a fucking little bitch and get down there." I walked to the first cabinet, pulled the door open, and to my luck, there were the wire cutters. I grabbed them, closing the door, and was about to go up the stairs when I heard a little girl's giggle. I turned and said, "Hello?" That's when I heard a little girl's voice saying with laughter, "Come here and play." I fearfully replied, "No, leave me alone." The voice changed into a deep, inhuman growling voice saying, "Get back here." The lights went out, and I heard all the tools falling out of all the cabinets. I ran upstairs but was blamed and beat up for messing up Tim's tools. When I turned 18, my mom finally told me about that house. According to her, the guy who rented the house to her and Tim got the house after his wicked mother died and didn't want to live there, but was okay with renting it to someone else. His mother supposedly hated him towards the end of her life. I wonder if that had anything to do with the way we grew up there. Thanks for listening, gang. Please like, share, and comment, and subscribe if you'd like. Check me out on social media and leave me a tip if you'd care to on my Patreon page, and all those links are in the description of this video right below. Got a scary story you'd like me to share? Send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I never turn a story down, no matter how long or how short. I enjoy hearing all your true scary tales, and I love to share them with the listeners. I'm still working on some merchandise and such, so more to come on that front in the following months. Until next time, everyone, be excellent to each other. And remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.